Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
I know this place used to belong to the 8 Greed Kings, but it's still amazing how beautiful this place is. It had been 3 days since Blue Rose had departed from the ruined city to meet with the Platinum Dragon Lord. While it would normally have taken at least 2 weeks to reach this location, such travel was trivial for those who possessed teleportation magic. Since only one of them had actually seen this place before, the rest could not help but gawk at their surroundings, as if they had stepped into the realm of mythology, and were now in a world where creatures beyond their wildest dreams inhabited. Even for adamantite adventurers, those who could be considered at the peak of humanity and who had seen a myriad of wondrous places could not help but be enchanted by such allure. This was clearly the work of gods at a glance. Even if its origins were shrouded in such unscrupulous actions, it did not detract from its beauty in the slightest. So no one could blame Locus for giving voice to her inner thoughts. I was shocked the first time I saw it as well. But I would expect nothing less from those beings. You can practically see the vanity within this place. And it shows their true nature clear as day. Evil Eye's tone was clearly one of mockery, but it was not as if the others did not share the sentiment. Though it happened long ago, it was still true that the Greed Kings cause unimaginable devastation upon this world. It was only natural that anyone who heard of them would not be favorable inclined to them. Even the few who believed in their existence did not care for them, despite the abilities they supposedly gifted mankind with. Honestly, the fact that such a building could even be built seems impossible to me, but nothing is impossible for the gods, or so they say. Still as bitter as ever, aren't you, crybaby? A youthful voice called out to Evil Eye, at odds with her appearance, and her expression turned into one of frustration. Of course, no one could see it, as she responded in turn. It's called being practical, you granny. And enough with that pathetic nickname. Haven't you ever heard the term, respect your elders? The pot calling the kettle black? Though they seemed to be aiming for each other's throats, Locus knew they were simply making playful jabs, as was their relationship, so she said nothing, and merely continued to watch from the sidelines. Well, in any case, I'm glad you're here. Follow me. TSA wants to talk to you all about something we've been planning. They gave their acknowledgement and followed her to the one that had called them her. Though the castle was sprawling with passageways, she seemed to have memorized the exactly way to the room, as she did not hesitate for even a moment. However, when they finally arrived to his domicile, the person that was there to greet them was probably the last person she expected to see. Azuth. Oi, is that any way to greet a family member? Her surprise was genuine. Though he had stated he would be able to escape, she still had doubts regarding his survival. Sigh, I have a lot of things I'd like to say in response to that, but putting that aside, why are you here? Same as you. We're here to help this big lug defeat that monster. There could only be one person in the room he was referring to. Indeed. It was the being who stood atop the mightiest race in the world. A being whose power could not even be measured in numbers. It was the Platinum Dragon Lord, Saint Dorcas Phasian. His shining form was one befitting one of his status, and as he spread out his wings, the luster emitted from his scales seemed to dominate the entire room, almost acting as a light source on its own, giving him a deific radiance that made anyone witnessing it feel inferior. Though this was meant to be a formal meet-up as equals, Locus had to resist the urge to bow in the face of it. I'm glad you have come, adventurers of Blue Rose. It was actually Rigrid who had suggested that I call you, and if she trusts you all, then that's good enough for me. The members of the room felt their bodies vibrate as he spoke, his deep voice being calming yet commanding. Truth be told, I likely would have called out to you at some point even without her advice. Simply put, we need as many people on our side as possible in order to obtain victory against the Sorcerer King. The importance of the discussion reached the room's inhabitants at the mention of his name, as they straightened themselves out to listen. Though I'm sure you've all heard rumors of his power, and some information has most likely reached your ears by now, I can assure you that whatever you have heard is true, no matter how ridiculous it may seem. Maybe it doesn't even reach what he is truly capable of. Whatever you've heard, assume he is twice as strong as that. That is how powerful he is. Hearing even the Platinum Dragon Lord speak with worry in his tone was more than enough to put even the most willful people in the room on edge. That being the case, in order to have a chance at defeating him, only the top echelon of beings will do. He has both an advantage in both strength and numbers, but I alone can overturn most of those odds. However, I need a group of powerful people to act as a secondary main force. Which is why I have called you all, as you are currently the strongest human fighting force on our side. But I am the only one here who possess power to face him one-on-one. Are we certain of that? The one to voice her objection to that statement was Evil Eye. Oh? And who else could do so? Locuse. What? Likely everyone in the room had the exact same thought at the ridiculous words that had left her mouth. Locuse, if he truly is as strong as he is saying, maybe it's time you finally use that. I doubt that even he could withstand it. What are you talking about, Evil Eye? Her face was one of complete confusion. Just what was this girl on about? If what we need to defeat the Sorcerer King is absolute power, then why not use the power of darkness that you say can destroy an entire nation? What? Gagarin said before that she heard you muttering to yourself about keeping the Dark Blade's power in check lest it control you, and while I know you probably didn't want to worry, should we use that power against the Sorcerer King if possible? I doubt even he could withstand something so strong. The second she understood what was said, her face instantly flushed scarlet from the scalding shame she was feeling at this continued misunderstanding. Why did she have to talk so loud? Such a power exist within that blade? Even I had no idea it could cause such devastation. Even the Platinum Dragon Lord was starting to believe this nonsense. Things were only spiraling out of control fast, and it was getting harder and harder to think of a way out. Why does she keep bringing that up? I need to hurry up and give an excuse before this goes any further. But before she was even able to utter a word, someone was already there to explain for her. Huh? Are you seriously still going on with that weird phase of yours? I thought you would have outgrown that by now and all your weird posing, but I guess that was too much for your dear brother to hope for, wasn't it? Exclamation point. Well, wait. That's not. As she flailed her arms around in her vain attempts to defend her honor, a quick look around the room revealed eyes full of pity and shame upon seeing their allies' strange habits revealed. The deathly silence that came afterwards almost drove her to tears. After what felt like hours to her, the conversation finally started once more. In any case, while it's true I need fighting power, it is not to make them fight the Sorcerer King with me. I have no doubt in my ability to handle the undead he has spawned, but I need to preserve my strength for my final battle. Though I will help where I can. For those remaining, however, we would need adamantite-level beings at the minimum to fend off the creatures he controls. Though everyone had expected it, the statement still left everyone completely shocked. Adamantite adventures were the rarest of the rare. The people who could claim to be a part of this exalted group was so small, they would likely only number in the hundreds in this world's billions of souls. And the amount that they knew personally would be in single digits. The slain theocracy will more or less be a sacrifice in this, since they want to wage war directly. Though I have told them to not attack, I have no doubt that their pride will get the better of them one of these days, and they will act on their own. Should that happen, we can use the opportunity to attack while they are preoccupied, though it is not the best case scenario. Why is that? Wouldn't having the two strongest nations in the region leading a two-pronged assault be the best case scenario? Gagarin's question was very sensible when considering the opposition. There are many reasons for that, and frankly too many to list at present. But allow me to enlighten you with the most glaring problem. He took a deep breath, and sighed deeply before speaking. Before the siege on his city can begin, we need to lay the groundwork for his demise. He paused for a moment to ensure everyone understood, then continued. As much as it pains me to admit it, the Sorcerer King's intelligence is shockingly vast. And because of that, he has managed to get the general populace to accept him as a ruler, and not see him for the monster he truly is. As it stands now, we would need to have a justifiable cause to attack him, which is going to be a major source of concern moving forward. Rigrid stepped up to explain just how that could be so. Because of the way that Bastard operates, it's practically impossible to make the first move. He makes diplomatic visits to countries, acts civil and plays by the rules, where both countries get a fair trade-off. Thing is, he oftentimes is saving those countries in the process. As a result, they become indebted to him, and in most cases, see them as their savior. Because of this, we can't take him down out of nowhere without justifiable cause, as the other countries would soon attack us, which would most likely result in a mass genocide. Locke shivered as she imagined such an event occurring, and the ease of the scenario coming to pass shocked her to her core. Most of the countries that currently supported him were quite weakened due to attacks that had supposedly occurred, and thus would be completely wiped out if it came to pass. The Holy Kingdom had recently been torn to pieces by Jaldabaoth, and it would be impossible for them to engage in a war and win with the state they were in. Though with rumors of the northern side's almost religious-like zealotry towards the undead, they had no doubt they would fight until their last breath for him. The Empire was also in a rather precarious situation. Even if they had not lost many soldiers from the battle with the kingdom, many of the soldiers requested to leave due to the mental damage. And with their vassal status, a portion of the army was replaced with undead soldiers, which, even putting them aside, spies in Irantal reported that the dwarves that lived there were rescued from extinction by him, and thus shared a sentiment of pledging their lives to him. Though allies in name only, it did not change the fact it was yet another country under his banner. What they would do in the event of his death, however, remains to be seen. Because of this, the Sorcerer Kingdom effectively had control over half the remaining human nations. Even so, an attack could theoretically still be carried out. The Baharuth Empire seemed to become a vassal due to being backed into a corner, at least if what was leaked from the theocracy was true, and the south side of the Holy Kingdom was still very much against the undead, and effectively cut ties with the north. This meant that there was still a chance to persuade them into an alliance, and to challenge him directly without the need for preparation. Yet only a few days prior, the Draconic Kingdom had announced its plans to become a vassal state to the Sorcerer Kingdom. Because of the amount of allies he has managed to accrue, we could not simply get away with charging his city without substantial interference from other nation, and a killing floor is not what I would want to have happen. Even in the best-case scenario, the council state's reputation would plummet, and the other councillors would place the blame squarely on TSA. And if they were to fight, even more devastation would occur. Which is why we need to enlist the aid of adamantite-level adventurers. They are the only beings powerful enough to hold off the Sorcerer King's confidants while I deal with him directly. During the war with the kingdom, I done just that as I attempted to end the Sorcerer King. Every member of Blue Rose simultaneously froze in place, as if their souls had been snared by this absolutely jaw-dropping news. Why, you battled the Sorcerer King? Gagarin could barely even get the sentence out as the shock of such a thing event happening right under their noses was too much to bear. Indeed. When he was only guarded by the Prime Minister of the Sorcerer Kingdom, I had a Zuth distractor while I tried to take him down. So that's how you were able to escape the kingdom. As she thought back on it, his knowledge of the theocracy and other such things were probably gained from him. I told you back then, didn't I? We need a monster to take down that monster. And it just so happens one is right here. He jerked his thumb back with a smirk, drawing their gazes to said monster. Indeed. As it turns out, the Sorcerer King was much more powerful than I had anticipated. Even I had a tough time. Though I gained crucial intel on his abilities and power. If I battle him in my real body, I cannot lose. The statement that overflowed with absolute confidence seemed to put the room at ease. Hearing him say he could definitively defeat the Sorcerer King filled everyone in the room with a feeling of relief that could not be described. However, then that feeling was utterly dashed as they heard his next words. While the Sorcerer King is an opponent that does not warrant too much caution, it's a different matter for Albedo. The Prime Minister of the Sorcerer Kingdom was extremely well known to the few people who maintained trade with the country. All who had witnessed her said she possessed beauty beyond compare, enough that men may go to war just to see her smile directed at themselves. But it would seem her strength also lay within in that domain. With a single swing of her axe she managed to cave the ground beneath me in, then send me flying with a punch upwards. Her physical strength is enormous, and frankly I think she is the one we need to be the most wary of. Because of this, I have my doubts of facing her head-on, and if she is still in the presence of the Sorcerer King when I face him down, my defeat will be assured. It is because of this that we need adamantite adventures to hold her off as I fight, as one will not be enough this time. They will not fall for the same trick twice, and forgive my bluntness, but I don't think you could buy that much time. However, I only need enough to use my ultimate attack. So I must ask, do any of you know who could be an ally in this? The group thought to themselves for a bit on all of the people they knew. Unfortunately, many of them were citizens of the kingdom, so much of their fighting force had been reduced to ash. But even so, one still remained that they were confident could even hold back Albedo by himself. And a certain vampire was all too eager to recommend him. Maman-sama would happily do so. With his shining blades that can cut through all the world's evil, I have no doubt that he would lend us his assistance. His strength could never be outdone, that I'm confident of. And since he is under the employ of the Sorcerer King, we can use him as our eyes and ears to know what he is planning ahead of time. That great man will surely. I would not feel that to be wise. The Dragon Lord quickly interjected in the middle of her tirade on the Dark Hero to give his own thoughts on the matter. He was well aware he may not even get the chance should her ramblings continue. I will admit that if we could gain his allegiance, he would be an invaluable asset, as he was able to fight toe-to-toe with Jaldabaoth. However, I still have some suspicions about him. I would like to know how he feels about the Sorcerer King's actions before I can definitively say he is on our side. Though I think the chances are extremely low, in the event that he is more loyal to the Sorcerer King than we believed, we may have to deal him as well. He chose to ignore Evil Eye's mutterings as he turned to the others to see any other options. Hey, I thought of one. What about your sister Tira? Isn't she still active in Igenia? That's not a bad idea when I think about it. Tia gave voice to her thoughts as she recalled her distant sibling. Though both Tia and Tina had chosen to become adventurers, their sister Tira had not made that choice, and instead remained an assassin for hire. She was the only reason the organization could still function with the loss of two of its best members, as she was easily the strongest and most skilled of the three, so she could keep it running efficiently. Though she was not a hero, she was no villain either. If one had to rank her morals, she would likely be put in the same category as a sellsword or mercenary. Well, she probably won't help unless we pay her though. I can't see her simply joining out of the kindness of her heart. Well, in this situation, all we need is cooperation. If money is what it would take to gain her assistance, then so be it. The goal is not to defeat them, but to draw out as much time as possible, so loyalty to us isn't a big issue. Are there any others besides her who may be willing to help us? The five thought long and hard, yet after the prolonged period of introspection had ended, they could not think of a single person who met that criteria now. And that thought put into perspective just how much they lost in that war. Seeing how the mood had fallen, the Dragon Lord took that as a sign there were none, and continued his breakdown of the plan. I see. Even so, though we may have a large quantity of adamantite-level people already, we've already stated that raw power will not be enough to win. Mere manpower isn't enough to defeat one such as he. As this was the main point of their plan, TSA offered them all a summary on the specifics. While it pains me to say this, some sacrifices must be made if we are going to win. So I have conceived a plan with Rigrit that can destroy his reputation and give us our opportunity to strike. Simply hearing that sentence was enough to put Locuse on edge. She could sense the ominous meaning behind those words, and she did not care for it at all. As of right now, the city of Irantal has grown to become accepting of the undead guards, as to date, there have been no incidents involving unwarranted attacks. Not only are the undead his main security force, but when trading with other nations, they are also their lifeline, as the undead are their only notable export. So if we show to the world they are not as reliable as they claim, then things will come crashing down from then. I don't like where this is going. As a necromancer, Rigrit is adept at controlling the undead, probably more so than anyone alive at the moment. So if she were to take control of one of the Sorcerer King's undead, and cause it to go on a rampage, the foundation he has worked so hard to build would come crumbling down. Unfortunately, she does not possess the necessary power to do so yet, but given time we can carry out the plan. I see. If people see the undead will attack of their own volition, and aren't under the Sorcerer King's absolute control as he claims, then trust in his country will plummet like a stone. The plan itself is fairly simple, yet will be extremely effective, as his undead status will make people inclined to believe he did it on purpose. Evil Eye expressed her agreement with the statement. Though Lakiz expected her comrades to react with disgust at such a plan, she did not hear a single word of complaint exit their mouths, some of them even voicing their approval. What the hell are they talking about? Aren't we just as bad as the Sorcerer King then if we're killing innocents just to stop him? Lakuz's moral compass was having a hard time accepting such a plan. Though she still suffers from the pain of losing the kingdom and those she swore to protect, she could not bring herself to the same level for vengeance. How can you all say that with a straight face? Don't you care about the lives that would be lost in the process? Her rage was genuine. Even in the face of once considered at the peak of all life, she would not concede on such a point without a fight. I understand your reservations against such a plan, but I have no attachment to humanity. In the same way humanity doesn't see an issue with slaughtering demi-humans, I have no qualms about the deaths of humans. And while I would prefer that death is not needed, I will do whatever it takes to defend this world from my ancestors' mistakes. Boo! Though her heart tried to form a rebuttal, it died in the face of undeniable truth. It was hard to deny that humanity did not hold demi-humans in high regard. Many villages of theirs were burned by the hand of the slain theocracy, and even other countries would send adventurers to dispatch heteromorphs, even when they were amicable and not a threat, a notable example being the Empire's martial lord Gojin. Yet even so, she could not bring herself to accept such things. I understand your sentiment, Lakuz, I truly do. We would rather not have it come to this either, but when the fate of the world is at stake, we must sacrifice the few to save the many. Rigrit's words did little to quell the anger in her heart, however. In the end, they were still trying to justify why killing innocents. In what way is this saving the world? Her objection was quiet, almost inaudible, yet the rage behind the words was unmistakable, and that emotion alone carried her words to everyone present. How is any of this meant to be justifiable? Even if I hate the Sorcerer King for what he has done to the kingdom, and admonish the path of blood he has taken, I'm also not blind to the fact that the kingdom instigated first. Though he may have gone too far, hasn't he made the lives of his allied kingdoms infinitely better? Why do we need to kill innocents based on speculation? Lakuz had even shocked herself with how much she was defending the Sorcerer King's actions, but that was secondary to the fury she felt at her colleagues. Her arguments were meant to rebuke them, not justify the Sorcerer King. The kingdom incident had already pissed her off, but this was taking it to new heights. These were not the actions of people who were known as the peak of adventurers. I see. So you feel we are going too far because you believe the Sorcerer King has not done anything objectively evil yet? And you feel as though we are taking action too prematurely? Do you not feel that sort of thinking is naive? The Platinum Dragon Lord's weighty voice reverberated through the room as he admonished her thought process. Of course. We should not be killing innocents just to get a leg up on the enemy. And when he becomes too powerful to stop and decides to take action when he has complete control of the world, will you take responsibility knowing we could have stopped it? Even for a hypothetical, those situations are the extremes. Wouldn't he have taken the world by force had he wanted to do that? The more she debated, the more heated she became towards the Dragon Lord. Though he may be deserving of respect from his position. Her allies, when faced with this, did not know whose side to take. Would they go with their leader, who, though naive, only wanted to end things in a peaceful way, unlikely as it may be, or would they go with the most powerful being in the world, whose plan was infinitely crueler, but had a high chance of ridding the world of the scourge that has plagued it? Both sides has merits, and neither was truly wrong. It all came down to their own ideals. Logic versus emotion. Reason versus loyalty. Empathy versus callousness. Each represented what this argument came down to at its core. And only the individual could decide which was right. I see. It would seem your reluctance to accept this plan comes from your lack of knowledge to the current situation. Then allow me to ask you one question. This goes for you all as well as I feel it will help you make up your mind. Fine, her usual polite and graceful demeanor was nowhere to be seen as she complied with his request. Do you know what a player is? The breath hitched in her throat. I've been meaning to ask you this, but are you a player? She had been pondering the meaning of those words ever since she had left Inveria, but hearing them brought up again now brought about a wave of confusion and panic. Before her brain could even fully process what was happening, Evil Eye was the first to voice her thoughts on the matter. Ah yes, the supposed gods that descended upon our world, correct? Those beings that possessed power so great, they completely warped the world around them and were responsible for the Dragon Lord's near extinction. And if I'm not mistaken. She paused to stare directly at the Dragon Lord. Your father was the one who summoned them here, correct? Though no expressions could be seen through the mask, she would most likely be wearing a scowl, as her tone carried a clear hint of mockery. Indeed. Though I feel I must reiterate that my father's actions were done of his own accord, and most of dragonkind have disavowed him. You still could have stopped it though. As he was about to respond to her muttering, he could not help but notice the expressions of the others in the room. Confusion, panic, and curiosity were the main emotions written over all of their faces. Well, I guess this topic would be quite shocking to one who hasn't heard the story before, he thought to himself. I can see the rest of you have no idea what is being discussed. Though I am not surprised. Very few people in the world now know the truth on the origin of the gods. Even within the slain theocracy, only the Pontifex Maximus knows this secret, as it is something of an initiation ritual to be granted that role. The entire story behind this is quite complicated, and far too long for us to speak about it, so I will simply inform you of the basic outline of the story. He gave a deep breath as he prepared himself for the long explanation that was to follow. The beings that you all know as the 6 great gods were the first beings known as players, the term being coined by them when they were first brought to this world. That single sentence was already enough to stupefy the adventurers, barring Evil Eye. Though everyone knew of the gods, the one thing that nobody was able to agree on was how they arrived in the world. The topic was still hotly debated in many religious factions that caused no end of headaches to listen to. As you are no doubt aware, dragons are, by their very nature, greedy beings that hunger to hoard wealth. Even I am no exception, yet I am able to curb my impulses to focus on the greater good. However, there were none in all of dragonkind who were as greedy as the Dragon Emperor. His avarice consumed him like no other, and during our reign, he hoarded as much treasure as he could find, even claiming other dragons' wealth as his own, which was a large part in why they were so quick to abandon him. He likely saw the world itself as his own treasure. Anyone who had encountered one of the Dragon Lords knew of their immense hatred of their kind's ruler. It was one of the few things about them that was somewhat commonly known to those who knew of their existence. But to this day, no one knew the cause of such hatred. The only ones who knew were the dragons themselves. Even though they may have resented him for it, his power towered over all others. Not a single dragon could ever hope to match his strength. Yet even with all the world wealth, and everything else within it entirely in his grasp, it was still not enough for him. He desired more, even when there was nothing more to gain. But to one with powers that can dominate the world, even others were not beyond his reach. Understanding began to dawn on the adventurers' faces as they began to slowly understand what had happened. Using every ounce of his abilities, he managed to create a spell that would let him obtain the most valuable treasure in existence. Something that no other could rival. And he indeed succeeded. He found what is undoubtedly the greatest treasure in existence. A world-level item. His tone became far graver, and almost fearful as the title left his jaws. As their name implies, these items possess the power of an entire world, and their abilities go beyond the realm of possibility. At this, Evil Eye finally showed some emotion. The power of an entire world. Like the nameless spellbook? I always thought that was just an exaggeration of its value. It would seem you're well informed. Indeed, it is no mere hyperbole. They each truly live up to their names. And only the strongest and most powerful beings who had proven themselves worthy enough had a chance of obtaining a single one, as the tasks that were required to get them were unimaginable. Even I do not know what was necessary. Though I cannot imagine what trails most have been overcome. As the strongest and most game-breaking items in Yggdrasil, it was only natural that the requirements to obtain such armaments would be equal to the power they commanded, and the conditions for gaining them were categorized into 3 distinct types. The first way to obtain one was to complete an event or raid that stared a world-class enemy. Though this was the only condition that directly told players they would receive a world-class item by completing the event, it was by no means an easy feat, nor was the item guaranteed. These events often took weeks or even months to be completed from the sheer difficulty, and only the topmost guilds and players would participate, as only they would possess a chance to win. And once the raid had finished, the world item would be given to the one who had contributed the most to the boss's defeat. Originally, the world item would be given to whoever had dealt the final blow to the creature, but after a particularly humorous incident where a low-level player joined at the last second and stole the kill, the devs decided to change the requirement after large amounts of player feedback from the participants. The second way of obtaining them was by fulfilling a hidden condition. Due to the nature of the game, there was no way to tell what actions or quest would result in such a treasure, but it was at least accepted by those who had gained one in this manner, that completing 80+ difficulty task was a prerequisite, with the Throne of Kings being a notable example. This was generally the most common way of finding items, as those who sought a challenge, or risked everything for great rewards were those who would be most deserving and most likely to find one of these secret items. The third and final way to obtain these items was the simplest way to obtain one, and often referred to by Yggdrasil's player base as the items that the devs forgot about. Keeping in line with their famous catchphrase to explore the unknown, many of the world items were hidden within the world's nooks and crannies. All you had to do was go out and find one. The most famous of which being Leaf of Yggdrasil, which was disguised as an ordinary leaf on a random tree within the game world. These were accessible to anyone, providing you could find them, yet even within this subset, many were still within high-level areas or dungeons that required large amounts of skill and party coordination to navigate. As a result of these ridiculously harsh requirements, only 97 of Yggdrasil's 200 world items were found by the time of the game's shutdown. Most were hoarded by guilds, and generally rarely ever saw use. Even so, the fact that not even half had been discovered during its entire lifespan was a testament to the difficulty in obtaining one. Yet no matter what category they belonged to, there was one universal constant that would always remain. Obtaining one for free simply does not happen. Regardless, my father attempted to bypass such trials by summoning the items through his magical abilities. And in a sense, he succeeded, and obtained the treasure he had sought. However, there are no shortcuts to power, and in the end, his greed was what caused his downfall. The Dragon Lord merely shook his head at the memory, though no one would tell what emotion he was conveying. It was certainly not any kind of sympathy. He learned too late that world items are intrinsically tied to their owners. They offer the protection of the world to those who own them. And when the spell was cast on the item, the players came to. Locus finished his sentence as the realization hit her. The 6 great gods was summoned by the Dragon Emperor. Indeed, and their appearance in our world has caused us no end of troubles. All of Dragonkind blame my father for their downfall, for had he not used that spell, the Greed Kings would have never been summoned, and the massacre that befell us would not have taken place. That's all well and good, but how exactly does any of that apply to our current situation? Last I checked, the gods all died out centuries ago. In contrast to the group's astonishment at hearing such a valuable piece of information, Azuf did not seem to care much at all, and seemed to be growing tired of the conversation, and he made no attempts to hide his boredom with his speech. Though disrespectful, no one seemed to pay it any mind, as this was just the way he tended to act. He considered himself a nonconformist, but if one were inclined to be less polite, the correct term would undoubtedly be manchild. Locke still had many embarrassing memories from when they were still nobles, as his attitude would cause her all manner of grief at events they attended. Because even though the gods of old had died, the spell he used to summon them had some unintended consequences. For the first time since they arrived, her usually vibrant voice became grim, and laced with undertones of anger. Even though the spell was only meant to be a one-time use, the power of the spell was greater than even the Dragon Lord imagined, and since he died, there was no chance to reverse it in any way. Every 100 years or so, the spell activates once again, bringing with it the beings who change our world. And now is that time. Locke froze. Her thoughts drifted to the being she had met in that crumbled castle once more, as the true meaning of his words finally took shape in her mind. That's impossible. Of course it was impossible. Such a thing would not happen. Could not happen. The very idea was utterly absurd. Maybe it was just a coincidence. He couldn't have been one of them, right? Maybe I misheard him. What if that term meant something different in his culture? What if? Countless rationalizations and excuses permeated her mind, as it refused to acknowledge what was so clearly laid out. But, if he really is one of them, then what should I do? The correct answer would probably be to speak about the encounter with the Dragon Lord, but she had her reservations against that. If she did inform him of Genjiro's existence, he would likely be captured by him, or even killed on the spot. No, after hearing his thoughts on his kind, that would be the only outcome. Though part of her wanted to get it off her chest, as he was essentially a living god that was now free to do as he pleased in the world. But at the same time, he had not done anything wrong as far as she knew, and seemed fairly amicable. It felt like she would just be sacrificing an innocent, just as they wished to do. In the end, she decided to bite her tongue and waited for him to finish his point before making her decision. And from this, I can make this had led me to believe that the being that was brought to our world this time was none other than the Sorcerer King. Upon hearing this, not even Evil Eye could hide her shock. Though she had known of the existence of players, the fact that they may still exist today was a terrifying prospect. And the fact that they were currently at war with such a being only compounded those fears. Players are nothing but a scourge on the world, and their existence is an unnatural one. They stray the world from its intended path, and spark death and destruction whenever they appear. Even if they have good intentions, it will only end in disaster. Hearing this only made her more confident in her choice to remain silent. Oi TSA, I've been wondering this ever since you called for me to fend off that harpy, but wouldn't it be a better idea to get help from other dragon lords instead of relying on us? These beings are strong enough to take down my powered suit with one punch. Wouldn't it be better to fight them with equal opponents? The rest of the room shared his sentiment. Though they were rarely seen, the Dragon Lords were well known to be the most powerful force on the planet. Would it not make sense for him to rely on their aid instead of human adventurers, who were much weaker in comparison, and would no doubt fall nearly instantly when asked to face opponents of such caliber? I had considered it, but the flaws outweigh the benefits. For starters, when the Sorcerer King and his entourage is defeated, he will no doubt possess powerful artifacts of immeasurable strength, much like the Greed Kings had. And given what we know, it is likely that a world item will be among them. If we fight in together, the other dragons will fight over who shall obtain such a treasure, and I would rather they not fall into the wrong hands. I will not make such a mistake again. Though he said the last part quietly, it was still easily audible due to his large size. I am also not on good terms with them. At best we have no animosity towards one another, and at worst we are mutual enemies. Though they all share the same hatred of players due to their actions, I can't see them leaving their dens to fight for the common good. That only leaves me with you all, as you are the only others who can be trusted, as well as be willing to fight. As adamantite adventures, stress was a normal part of life. Be it the stress of defeating a particularly difficult foe, or the expectations placed upon them by those weaker than them. Over time, one naturally grows accustomed to such expectations, and eventually they stop being problems altogether, so stress became a very rare occurrence for them. But that was exactly what they were feeling, as the full weight of the task ahead of them pressed down on their souls. I understand that this is a difficult task to perform, truly I do. The demon gods that ravaged the planet were nothing in comparison to these beings, and many of you would struggle against even them. But we are out of time. We need to strike now before the Sorcerer King turns the entire world into a repeat of the Dragon Emperor's reign. Even if I cannot change your stance on the matter, please understand that this is necessary. I can't say I'm entirely on board, but I won't let that bony bastard harm anyone else. Gagarin was the first to express her support on the matter, which was swiftly backed up by Evil Eye. I'd say now is the best time to strike, as there is no indication we are the ones doing anything. At the very least we have actual information on him, which is already a step ahead compared to Jaldabaoth. We'll head off in search of others who may be willing to assist in our cause. Until then, continue attempting to lair Bellup, until you are able to control one of those abominations Rigrit. That was already the plan, ya crybaby. Though the laughter and jest of her comrades was a nice change of pace from the recent events, it did not distract her from the events that were now in motion. Even after all she had heard, her opinion had not changed. In the end, they were merely attempting to rationalize their own crimes, under the pretense of it being for the greater good. Locus knew she was no saint. She was not a fool who could not see the bigger picture. Sacrifices often needed to be made, as it was fundamentally impossible to save everyone. If a person did happen to hold such a belief, they would surely be heading down the path to ruin and misery. Yet this was not a situation where they were rescuing helpless people in need and losing a few in the process. This was nothing more than a slaughter of innocents to gain the lead on a war. A hypothetical one at that. It seemed like just a few days, the people who she thought she knew inside and out had changed completely. When she thought of the actions of the Sorcerer King, and compared it to their own, a new question had replaced the previous one, and one she could tell would not be alleviated nearly. Aren't we just as bad as the other side? 2138. In the past, people would have looked to the future in glee, wondering what advancements the world will have made, and seeing it as a shining path that would lead them to whatever they wished to do. However, after many years with the constant shifting and changing of the status quo, this attitude towards destiny began to become more and more skewed, as people rarely even managed to fulfill their dreams and lost their passion as a direct consequence. The percentage was microscopic outside of the wealthy, and even then it was rare. Most people simply ended up as another cog in the wheel, simply earning a wage and the ability to go on another day. Even so, people still held on to that faint speck of hope to carry them through the day, as the promise of advancement and promotion was dangled over them like a carrot and stick. Yet even through this bleakness, the people who managed to achieve their dreams did still exist. One such case was a man who referred to himself online as Punito Mo. He had always had two passions in life: gaming and war. Specifically the strategic part of combat and having to outsmart the enemy in clever ways. As most people who are passionate about a subject do, he tended to share much of his interest with the people around him. Though he may not have indulged in this as much as more eccentric individuals within his guild did, it was still enough for him to be labeled a military otaku. He found that the best way to experience his passion was by playing online games and using his strategy and tactics to win. Though he did enjoy this, there was rarely any games that let him fully indulge in this pleasure. After he came to this realization, it led him to what he felt his calling was. If he couldn't find one, he would simply need to make one. As one of the lucky few to receive an education, he had a much wider range of careers than most, and was able to achieve his goal after no small amount of effort, becoming a programmer under one of the larger tech companies. From there he simply used what he already knew of games to create his own worlds and ideas. He was under the firm belief that taking ideas from a game to use in his own was not plagiarism, but instead, inspiration. Because of this experience, he was extremely good in online games, using the experience he had accrued from other games and the ones he had worked on to great success. His backlogs of games was utterly enormous as a result, and he possessed nearly every category of game there was. Though his work hours were fairly long, he still found time to play all of them, a fact which consistently astounded his friends. Yet it shows just how far society has degraded when such a relatively normal job is seen as a dream that only the wealthy can afford to attain, to say nothing of high-end ones. But when everything in their life is devoted to getting it, they fail to realize that they have nothing else by the time they achieve their goals. Why must programming be so difficult? He slammed his head down on his desk in defeat as the amount of errors he had seen today began to wear down on his psyche. Even when you love your work, no one is safe from the stress of failure. And though he loved to create his own world and story, bringing it to fruition was proving to be a most difficult task. But he had resolved himself to bring his world to life, no matter how difficult. Still, as he stared at the countless syntax errors, his motivation to do so was getting weaker and weaker until it reached a breaking point. You know what? This can wait until tomorrow. I'm done for now. But man, I need to cool off. I guess the only way to calm down after making games is by playing them. One thing he was particularly grateful for was about his line of work was the fact that he was able to work from home. Though this had made him known as a bit of a recluse by his neighbors, he did not mind. All right. What is on the agenda today? It was always a chore for him to decide one to play in his utterly extensive catalog. Should he try something new, or continue playing one that was already started? The same thing would happen each and every time he chose to play. Though he disliked how it cut into his free time, he also understood it was unavoidable, since he rarely found a game that he would spend all his time on. Now, what to chew, what? This time, however, his course would be decided near instantaneously. Is that Yggdrasil? Didn't they shut that down quite some time ago? Though the only one to answer the question was the empty air around him, he already knew the answer. He had even received a request from Mamanda on the day it went down to join him in staying until the servers ended. Unfortunately, that was on a particularly busy day, so he could only stop by and say hello. Yggdrasil was without question his favorite of all the games he had played, so it was a shame to see the news the server was going down, especially since he had hoped to return to it one day. It was a game that allowed him to indulge in information gathering, since that role was extremely important in that game. The only thing he could think of that was a negative was the devs and their sadistic ways of balancing the game. No, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that was part of the reason he loved the game so much. Though the devs were universally hated by the player base for ambiguous about everything and everything regarding the game, the environment created by that made knowledge a great bargaining tool and weapon to use. Something no other game could do. It was this style of fighting that he specialized in. Gathering information to use against others, and thus turn the situation into his favor. He would sometimes get a bit too into the role, earning him no small amount of teasing from his guildmates. The memories of his times with the game trickled down like rain, and gave rise to a warm smile, as he wished to relive those memories once again. I doubt it would have been brought back for no reason. An offline patch would be pointless for that game, since the fun is being with other players, so maybe they had an update and brought it back? Maybe people wanted it and I just missed that it was brought back online? Though he didn't know the reason for its emergence, he was still happy to see it. Though he didn't expect his old gear in Nazarick to still be there after so long, but even if he had to start over, he wouldn't mind. In fact, he may be able to find a better class for his purposes, as Commander was not suited for that role as well as other. But he had fun with role-playing as a great leader with it, and it was useful to others, so he did not mind. Clearing his head of his pointless thoughts, he refocused on his goal and moved over to its icon. Well, no time like the present, I guess. Tap. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was a sea of green. What lay before him was a forest so thick that the night sky could not even be seen. A gentle wind blew through the tree line, creating the sound of rustling leaves and shrubbery that was both calming to the mind and pleasing to the ears. In spite of this fact, anyone in his circumstances would likely feel the exact opposite of those emotions for one crucial reason. Those sounds had not been heard on Earth for over 50 years. Though this would normally cause a large amount of alarm, he could only stare blankly at what was before him. Even for someone who prided themselves on being level-headed, such a reaction was completely abnormal. In all likelihood, his brain had become overloaded with the influx of new information, and his exact circumstances had yet to register in his mind, leaving him only to stare into the empty space before him. Yet even when the reality of his situation had hit him, he did not fall into panic. He was shocked at such a development, but his consternation only lasted a moment, as he immediately checked his surroundings for any sort of clear or present danger, but could only see the emerald sky stretching on without a sign of life in sight. Even after verifying that nothing was in his general vicinity, he could not completely alleviate his suspicion. Randomly appearing in a forested area was. After his surroundings were clear, he moved on to check himself for any abnormalities, and the moment he did, the memories of his previous actions came back to him. Now I remember, I had logged on to Yggdrasil earlier, so I must be in the game since I'm still my old avatar. Honestly, he was a bit embarrassed for the way he acted, and was thankful that no one was around to witness it, but he still was questioning what had happened between then and now. Why did I black out just now? He briefly began to ponder the matter, before recoiling in shock at a revelation he just experienced. He had out his arm to where his chin would be if he were still human, but when he made contact, he noticed something that was impossible. Feeling. Something that was impossible to properly replicate within VR had just been experienced by him, and that single small brush had snapped him back into his previous state of shock. That small touch also began to alert him to other things that did not make sense. The fact that his HUD was nowhere to be seen, the fact that he was not in any starting area that he knew of, nor his guild base, and other small details that slowly forced him to accept reality. He had been summoned into Yggdrasil. What other option could there be given the facts? The most glaring being his new form, as that was his avatar within the game. Though he was extremely confused, he managed to regain his calm after a few moments. The how or why of his situation did not matter. The best thing to do in this moment would be to cast out everything unnecessary and have a clear mind. The fact is that I have been summoned, so there's no use panicking over what's said and done. Though I'm confused on how this came to be, the main question I have right now is, where am I? Though he may have accepted his situation, he still needed to learn more about it. Yggdrasil was host to an uncountable number of forested areas that were made from various different materials, such as crystal and coral, and even when they did use the standard wood, there would always be some sort of gimmick involved. And though it was beautiful, the area would never look so ordinary. The exact specifics of his circumstances were also unknown. Were there people that lived here? Was he weak in comparison to themselves? Though he had resolved himself to keep a level head, he could not help but feel his gut cramp up from the stress at the prospect of dying to an unknown force. Encountering people right now would probably not be a good idea. Without prior knowledge, the likelihood that I will say or do something to get me into trouble is quite high. Considering how heteromorphic creatures were treated in both Yggdrasil, and within most forms of media, it would probably not be the best of ideas to start looking for human settlements looking like this. Had he known this would happen, he would have specced more into illusion magic, as that would at least give him a means to hide himself easier. Sadly, the commander-type skills he had possessed no such abilities. Plus I left all my old gear with Mamanga-san, so I'm even weaker than usual. Sigh. Why did things have to end up this way? Though he was bothered by his lack of preparation, that did not mean he was unhappy with his situation. His old world held nothing of value to him other than his own work, but when the only thing worth anything in your life is your livelihood, then what's the point? Compared to that, he was in a world with a completely clean slate, and could choose to do whatever he wished, however he wished. Not only was the prospect of his new options quite invigorating, but the idea of a completely new world that was waiting for him filled him with immense joy. However, information gathering needed to be done before any of that could become a reality. The best thing I can do right now is stay out of sight, and slowly learn more about my situation. If it turned out he really was in Yggdrasil like he initially assumed, then things would not nearly be so bad, as he had quite a vast amount of knowledge on the game and its mechanics, so he likely could survive for quite a long time if he played his cards right. With his plan set in stone, he gave a small humph to psyche himself up, and set off into the night, to gather as much information as he was able. Yes, that's how it would have gone. As he went to leave where he could see the most light, he felt small hit on his back. It felt light, as if someone had poked him. Yet the area where he felt it was quite large, and the contrast of such a large object making such a light impact unnerved him. Not to mention he had no clue on what had actually hit him in the first place, as the lack of force or pain made it impossible to guess without prior testing. He immediately spun around, to face whatever had landed a clean blow. Normally he would never be caught unaware like that, but somehow something had gotten the better of him. It would seem he was too caught up in his own thoughts to notice his surrounding. Despite the fact that he had just resolved himself to be careful, he managed to make such a mistake within mere seconds of his pledge. What am I, a noob? The first thoughts that raced through his mind was it was an attack from a Rouge-type player or enemy, but he quickly dismissed that as impossible, since any move from the attack-based stealth jobs would be sure to deal an immense amount of health. Though it may end up being something less dangerous, it was necessary to imagine the worst-case scenario and plan accordingly, then to underestimate his foe and be killed in short order. Though the likelihood of that scenario was not very high, he could not simply throw away the possibility of encountering a dangerous foe. He still was quite clueless in regards to his current situation, which could only allow him to grasp at straws as he began frantically rummaging through his memories to imagine the identity of the unknown assailant. A curse from a forest sprite? A high-level trap? Or is it something completely unknown to me? Damn it! Why did this have to happen so soon? He lacked what he considered the greatest weapon of all, information. And without his one true weapon, he felt as defenseless as a newborn. Regardless, the only way to obtain said weapon would be to face his adversary head-on and work from there. Which was why he had chosen to stand his ground rather than immediately flee. If it was faster than him, he may as well have just placed a kill me sign on his back. Yet once he had turned around, what was before him was completely outside the scope of his imagining. What was before him was none of the dangerous situations he had imagined, but instead what appeared to be a young boy, elven if his looks were any indication. No matter what way you looked at him, he seemed to be completely average, yet he would not let down his guard until he had confirmed he was not a threat. His pure white hair was shaggy and spattered with dust, well-kempt could not be used to describe it under any stretch of the word. Along with the signature long ears that came with the race, his face was youthful and quite pretty despite being male. His cloths, however, seemed to be quite strange. Despite appearing to be mercenary-like, with leather being bound in various places, it had a quality to it that showed it was no mere patchwork ensemble. That cloths themselves, though simple in make, seemed to be designed with the express purpose of blending in. A symbol was also sewed above the left breast. One which he did not recognize. He seemed to have just fallen on the ground, as he was trying to get his bearings as he held his hand to his head. More than likely he was also distracted, and did not notice Panito Mo, much like he had just done. However, his body seamlessly blended into the forest clearing, so his blunder was much more excusable. Still, one should never make such an easy mistake. Camouflage is one of the first things you need to learn how to detect. As he continued to chastise the tactics of this rookie in his mind, the elf finally began to come to his senses, and turned his gaze upwards at what he apparently had just slammed into at full force. Only to stare wide-eyed in abject terror. Hi-ee. Damn it, God fucking damn it. What the hell are they doing here? The sounds of rustling bushes and snapping branches echoed through the vast forest of Ivasha, accompanied by a constant stream of quiet cussing. The source of which being one of the elf kingdom's many conscripts. Conscripts were generally seen as a poor tactic in times of war, only to be used if one was out of options, or if the aim was to crush the opposition with pure numbers. These rarely worked, however, and really only damaged the country in the long run. For a human nation anyway. Because of their superior traits and natural-born talents, using conscript soldiers was much more effective for elves than it would be for humanity, since the population rarely dwindled due to the nature of this war. Of course, a trained or talented human could defeat a normal elven soldier with ease. One's innate talents could not make up the windfall when faced with the results of pure hard work. And in the case of the Holocaust scripture, this unspoken rule of nature was proven thoroughly. Members of the Holocaust scripture were all fitted with many magic items that increased their stealth abilities, possessed magic to further enhance these abilities, with some of the more combat-oriented members possessing third-tier spells, and knew of tactics that far surpassed those of the elves, causing what was once an even battle into an uphill battle in the blink of an eye. Though the average theocracy soldier was already stronger than the average elven soldier, they had always managed to gain the upper hand because of their guerrilla tactics. However, now that the theocracy had sent out soldiers who knew of such attacks, and ways to counteract them, the war had taken a very drastic turn. Although the Holocaust scripture were adept in these tactics, and possessed much better gear and skill than an individual soldier, they did not know the forest the way the elves did, and this advantage was the only thing that gave them a fighting chance. Even if the theocracy had individuals of a uniformly high level due to the upbringing and academies of the country, the elven army was able to hold them off for so long because of how difficult the forest truly was to navigate. Since humans rarely entered the forest anyway, no one other than an elf knew the path to reach the cities hidden within the woods. What separated the forest from ordinary ones wasn't just its size, but its almost maze-like structure. That, coupled with its sections of dense foliage that even blocked out the sky, a good sense of direction was the bare minimum requirement for entering, and if one were to travel even deeper, they would need to possess one that bordered on the supernatural. However, the elves had lived in this forest for hundreds of years, and as such, learned various paths and shortcuts that were invisible to outsiders, such as memorizing certain trees and branches as landmarks. They did not want to create a trail for the enemy to follow by leaving landmarks, so it was entirely committed to memory. Through this mastery were the elves able to squeak out victories against the superior forces of the theocracy. To date, none of the theocracy's forces had ever made it beyond the edges of the forest. Even if the Holocaust scripture had been able to best them in tactics, they were still unable to find their way too deep into the forest. Of course, it was only a matter of time before this too changed, and the true battle would begin. As the figure continued its hasty retreat, the seemingly endless stream of expletives continued on. Shit. Nobody told me the Holocaust scripture was already this far in. What the hell am I supposed to do now? I can't let him catch me. It was no secret that the fate of elves captured by the theocracy was not a kind one. Either you were used as a slave, and would be killed whenever your usefulness came to an end, or they would just end you outright. Damn that worthless king to hell. If he actually did his job as a leader, then I wouldn't even be in this mess. Aren't you supposed to be the strongest? Fight already. He quickly covered his mouth, as his anger was subconsciously causing his voice to rise. Though these words could easily be cause for execution if overheard by the wrong person, it was not at all uncommon. In fact, it would not be inaccurate to say this opinion was shared by the entire population. Only one person would argue the contrary, and that person was the lustful tyrant himself. Still, I'd been running for quite some time. He couldn't still be chasing me, right? Though his muscles ached and his mind screamed for rest, he knew in his heart that if he abided his thoughts, he would have already been captured. So he simply steeled his nerves and looked to his back too. He's gone? Though he found it hard to believe, it would seem he had somehow managed to lose a soldier from one of the theocracy's most powerful units. If that was the case, then maybe he could find a safe spot to lay and allow Sislims a brief reprieve. After that, reporting the incident to his superior would be the best course of action. If the theocracy are already this far in the forest, it means they must have found a way around its trickery. And if that's the case, then I need to. Suddenly, a force from his front immediately knocked him out of his thoughts and threw him to the ground. He had most likely ran into a tree in his moment of inattention. He was mildly embarrassed by this, and was thankful no one else was around. Whatever the case, it was obviously not pleasant, as he could not help but rub his head to soothe the blunt force trauma he had just endured. Yet once he had finally collected his thoughts enough to register what he had ran into, his entire body froze over. No. Not like this. What was before him was a monster. Plain and simple. The majority of its body seemed to be composed of a vine-like structure, jutting with thorns. Foliage and other plant matter appeared to be quite dense around the creature's face, with two piercing yellow eyes, devoid of emotion within the cage of shrubbery. Many types of plant-type monsters inhabited the woods of Eveshah, though they tended to be rare, and most tolerated elves if they were not disturbed. They could be a force to be reckoned with if one was made angry. The most common of which, dryads, would only attack people who violated and harmed the forest. However, since elves always strove to live in harmony with the woods, dryads did not bother them, and would even help each other out from time to time. Ainz were more rare, and were quite aggressive, as they were known to be territorial. But they usually only inhabited the deepest sections of the woods. Though dangerous to face one-on-one, they could be chased off by large groups of people, but required at least a platinum-ranked adventurer to defeat. Several other creatures took shape in his mind as he attempted to compare them to the being in front of him now, but nothing from his memory could compare with the creature. The only thing he did recognize was the danger of his situation. Though he knew how to fight, his abilities were at their best when he had the element of surprise. In a one-on-one, he was confident that he could at least stand his ground against a normal human, but fighting stronger creatures was not something he could feasibly do. Especially not against monster, and as if to illustrate that point, the creature immediately backed away from him as fast as it could, and tensed its body in what could only be described as a combat stance, a move that clearly emphasized the creature's intentions. Either preparing for a strike to come his way, or to land the first blow. Though from the occasional trembles its body was making, it was likely the former. This was extremely bad. He had held on to the faint glimmer of hope that this being could be reasoned with, yet that hope had been thoroughly dashed. Even so, he still had to try. Since it had taken a stance that showed it at least had intelligence, or at the very least was not a mere mindless brute. Though it was a long shot, it was his only chance of survival. But even with his newfound resolve, his lips could not seem to form words. He had already tensed up when he first laid eyes on its form, but the moment it engaged hostilities, every fiber being, down to his very soul, were all screaming the same message in unison. There is great danger here. Though he had been afraid before of the theocracy chasing him, this was a pure, primal terror. One that had potential to stop the hearts of the weak, such as himself, from the pressure alone. Granted, he had not faced many monsters himself, so he did not know if this aura was unique to this creature or not, but that thought quickly faded into the back of his mind, as survival instincts took over his mind, looking for any way to escape the current predicament. And though the aura was terrifying, that very aura also acted as a motivator for him as well. If this thing could put him in such a state without even attacking him, he would not even be able to withstand one blow when he actually was attacked by it. He did not want to die, but he also needed to fight. WWA. Escaping, were we? A smug voice from behind him sent a new thrill of terror through him. Though he knew it was a grave mistake turning away from the current threat, the same thing could be said about ignoring the new presence. He already had a hunch on who the voice belonged to, and as he turned to face his new adversary, it was proven correct. He had not escaped after all. Running into this beast was quite literally a fatal mistake. His fate had been sealed. Clever trick trying to lose me in the woods like that. Unfortunately for you, cheap tricks from the likes of you savages was only going to work for so long. GRK. He took a trembling step back to get away, but as he did so, he remembered the position he was in, and stopped halfway through the action. Though he wanted to run away, that would mean running headfirst into the creature behind him, so he was effectively frozen in place. His mind could not make up what to do, leaving him at a mental dead end. Don't even try it. The soldier, seeing this hesitation as a preparation to escape, threw him to the ground, preparing to slit the now defenseless elf's throat. Before he could end his life, however, he managed to throw a punch into his jaw, knocking the man off of him, and giving him a quick opportunity to maneuver away. You damn mongrel! However, if the man were able to be taken out by a mere punch, he would not be able to bear the title of the Windflower Scripture. He immediately replayed him in kind with a kick to the stomach, knocking him to the floor once more. This time, however, the man's boot slammed down hard against his chest, firmly planting him where he now lay. A cracking noise accompanied this, followed by a wince of pain. Did you really believe you could escape? You're an even bigger fool than I thought. In truth, he did not think escape was possible from the get-go, and was fully prepared to die. But after running for as long as he had without being caught, his heart held on to the slightest glimmer of hope that he may be able to live to see another day. Yet that cruel joke his mind had played on him only amplified the despair he now felt. The theocracy soldier merely raised his dagger, preparing to slice him cleanly at the throat. "I'll admit you gave me quite the workout trying to catch you, elf. Though it's a shame you're not a woman, since waiting for you vermin to wander into our traps is getting rather tiresome." He only closed his eyes, awaiting his end. The rantings of scum from the likes of these people was not worth listening to. He only prepared himself for the strike that was to follow. Yet as the seconds went by, that strike never came. He slowly opened his eyes again, only to find the man staring into space with fear written all over his face. There was only one thing that could have distracted the soldier from taking his life. It would seem he had finally noticed the monster, and could only stare in slack-jawed terror, much like he had before. The vines on its arms began to constrict even tighter around themselves, almost like muscles contracting. Though neither man could tell what the beast was thinking, it was plain to see that peace was not on its mind. Just what the hell are you, you monster? Stay away." It was almost comical how fast he had switched gears from his usually condescending attitude to one of absolute panic. In response to his wailing, however, a voice that sounded like it was both whispering and shouting rang forth. It was as if the wind itself was given voice. "Harden resolve." A light yellowish aura surrounded the creature, which quickly dissipated into nothingness as soon as it came. Was that some kind of spell? The quiet voice that he had heard before the light's appearance was what led him to that conclusion. Certainly high-level monsters could cast spells and the like. Intelligent ones had an even more likely chance to be able to learn them. For monsters, whose body is already a weapon in its own right, obtaining magic to further strengthen themselves made them so strong it almost seemed unfair. That was why only high-level adventurers could take down such beings. As he thought about such things, the mutterings continued. "Cloak of the Ancestor, Spirit Garb, Aspect. Just shut the hell up already, you freak. Don't come any closer. Fireball." It would seem the scripture member had caught on to what it was attempting, as he gave him no quarter, cutting the creature off before it could continue to get stronger. He scrambled to put himself in a proper attacking position in his fear, leading to a rather clumsy and somewhat humorous attack. Regardless of the method, an attack was still an attack. The crimson ball of heat sailed through the air, cleanly striking its target and detonating with a roaring blaze, turning the once vibrant patch of land into a blazing inferno, and a great column of smoke engulfed the fiend where it stood. Seeing as the creature had made no attempt to dodge the attack, he allowed himself to relax, and immediately assumed his prior aura of superiority, as if the frantic flailing a moment prior, "There goes you lifeline." The evil grin on his face widened to truly grotesque proportions as he stared down at his prey. Fire attacks were optimal strategies when facing creatures made of plants. Unless they could make do with spells of their own, it was a quick way into battle. However, a large vine immediately shot out from the cloud of soot, smashing into the man with unimaginable force and velocity. Its speed was such that the man did not even have the time to scream before his body was reduced to nothing but scraps of flesh and shards of bone. The armor he wore, one of the highest quality in the theocracy, did not affect the result in the slightest, as that too was obliterated upon contact with the whip-like appendage. He did not even need to look to know what its source was. As the black smog was carried away by the wind, the creature's form became visible once more. The flames did not seem to affect it in the slightest, as not a single leaf on its body was so much as singed. It just stood as if nothing had even happened. This was why he did not rejoice at the man's death. It had simply made his inevitability demise all the more absolute. Though he did not wish for it, he had accepted his demise, and simply closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable strike that would send his soul to the great hereafter. After a few moments, uncertainty began to fill his mind, wondering why he was still alive. Though brief, he had resolved himself for death but a mere few seconds prior, allowing his mind to go numb so his death would be painless. But now that these thoughts shook his courage, allowing fear to creep its way into his heart once more. Though soon after, he began to hear the large footfalls of the monster as it moved ever closer. Step, step, step. He had seen what this thing was capable of, and did not even attempt to run. And even if he attempted to, he was still tired from his earlier chase, and would not end up creating any meaningful distance. The only thing he could do was silently listen as his death approached inch by inch. Though what happened next was completely outside the realm of his imagination. Are you all right? Why the hell did I do that? When he had first noticed the new entity appear next to the current threat, he truly thought he was finished. He had been on guard ever since the elf had showed itself due to the circumstances of their encounter. Humanoids were always discriminatory of heteromorphs in Yggdrasil, and until proven otherwise, he would simply have to keep that train of thought in this world. At first glance, it would seem as though he had the upper hand, what with the elf's obvious fear of him. However, feigning weakness was an all-too-common trick in PvP games. Players would act weak, then when your guard was lowered, deliver what was usually a deciding strike. With that in mind, he chose to put up his guard rather than risk a fatal blow. This was a life-and-death situation, and he would not allow himself to be taken out due to carelessness. However, his plan went completely off the grid when the new guy showed up. Based on the dynamic between the two, it seemed obvious that he was stronger than the elf, which sent his alertness levels even higher. At first he was content to watch the two of them fight and stay out of sight to get a grasp of their abilities, but when his attention focused on him, he panicked and began to cast as many defense buffs as he could before getting interrupted. But instead, the most shocking thing yet had occurred. Not only did he use a third-tier spell, but the spell did not damage to him whatsoever. Since his race did not possess the Spell Immunity 3 trait, it meant that the spell had been nullified solely off of his less than impressive magic defense. And through that information, he could gather one crucial detail. He's weak. For starters, it seemed from his equipment that he was a stealth-based attacker that focused on both physical and magical attack. That being the case, his stats in those categories would have almost certainly been higher than his defenses. More than that, he should have used a much stronger spell if he had intended to kill. As he processed this information, he suddenly saw this situation for the opportunity that it was. I needed to test my strength sometime, right? He had shouted a defensive spell from his memory as an instinctive reaction, and to his surprise, the ability had actually worked. With that being the case, he could reasonably assume he still had his abilities from Yggdrasil as well. He attempted to throw a punch with his left-right arm, but ended up launching the entire length towards him like a whip, as it would seem that his right arm appeared to be a weapon rather than an appendage. He could not properly control his strength, however, leading to a rather messy end to the opponent in front of him. Even if he had roughly gained an outline of the opponent's strength, he would not allow himself to let his guard down. Maybe I can play on his good side, seeing as I just saved him. He chose to move slowly so he would not startle him and cause the elf to run. If he did so, it would be losing a valuable source of info, something he could never forgive himself for. Once he had made it to what he deemed a comfortable distance, he attempted to calm him by stating his intentions. Are you all right? Though his words were calm, the boy quickly shuffled away from him, eyes full of confusion and panic. It would seem both parties were equally suspicious of each other. If he was too scared of him to answer, he may have to use force to get the information out of him, which he did not want to resort to. What? Luckily, it would seem that wouldn't be necessary. Like I said, I just wanted to see if you were all right. I'd assume you would be shaken up from an event like that occurring. Slowly but surely, the fear on his face drained bit by bit, but the confusion never left. Is it because of my character? I guess I was right about how I am viewed then. I understand it may be unnerving to receive assistance from one such as I, but rest assured I mean no harm. Really? Though the tone of his voice made it quite obvious that he did not believe him, but he also had no real choice but to believe him. If he didn't and actually provoked him, that would not end well for him at all. He shakily rose from his spot on the ground, eyeing his savior the entire time in search of abnormal movements or signs of deception, but as one would assume, it was rather difficult to read a plant's emotions. What kind of creature are you anyway? I've never seen something like you before. I am a forest spirit. Have you not heard of my kind? If such a common enemy is unknown to these people, then I will need to be careful about what I say. I have, but aren't they, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, weak creatures? Your strength far exceeds anything I've ever come across. That is true, but in Yggdrasil, the same could be said about almost every race in the game. All of them started off weak, growing stronger as either the player leveled up, or the creature's ranks went up. All monsters in the game had variants of each other, so it was only reasonable to assume that some variants were weak, and some were strong. If he doesn't even know that much, then it's a wonder how he's managed to make it this far. Or is this a particularly low-level area in the world? No, you may be right about that. I just happen to be one of particular note. Though I would hardly say I'm as strong as you claim. And to answer your second question, if I wanted you dead, I would have done so already. However, it is a bit awkward to talk without knowing each other's names. I am known as. Before he answered, he paused for a moment, thinking of the proper reply to give in this situation. And after a moment had passed, he found it. Sue. A pleasure. Is that so? Ah. Forgive me, I'm not very familiar with the names of other races is all. And my name is Iron. Though I still have my doubts about you, the fact remains that you saved my life. Though he bowed in gratitude, it was done rather quickly, attempting to minimize the amount of openings he was showing. Though the curtness of the act was rather rude, it was understandable given the circumstances, so he did not pursue the matter. Think nothing of it. Actually, maybe you should. There is something I would like in return for saving you. And that is? Though he was obviously worried of what payment he would need to offer, it was unclear whether he was feeling that way towards. If possible, could you take me back with you to your base? He stopped his question halfway as he realized just how dangerous his next request could be. What if this is a trap? Maybe he is part of a larger group that are all on par with me? If I follow him, will he lead me to a guild? Not only did he not know anything about him, his motives, allies, and moral stance were also unknown variables. This was practically a coin flip with his life if things ended up badly. He weighed the pros and cons in his head, and truth be told, leaving here to continue with his original plan of espionage still seemed quite attractive. But he also knew he would never get such a perfect opportunity to gain information again. Not to mention how incredibly dangerous it would be to ask someone the location of their secret base. Yet, against all odds, he said it. He honestly felt like smacking himself in the face, as this went against everything his long history with PvP had taught him. But the decision has been finalized, and at this point, all he could do was chastise himself for his foolish mistake. Suspicion once again dawned on him upon hearing that extremely odd question. Why would you need to do that in the first place? You may have saved me, but that doesn't mean that I know your intentions are pure. I assure you I mean no harm. Right now all I want is information. And I feel that this is the best way to do it. And what exactly do you plan to do with that information? Unfortunately, I cannot say. The elf squinted his eyes one final time before giving a long-winded sigh. Though I can't say I am fully okay with this, I'll take you only because you saved me. Follow me. Though it would seem he had managed to coerce him for now, he could not help but notice his troubled expression as they left. Please don't let me regret this.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.